1 year ago, I took a leap of faith, quite literally, without knowing the impact it would have on my life. Hi, I'm Trent, and this is my story on my first year into the world of skydiving. So real quick, a background on me. I'm a nerd, I love technology. I work in IT where I process a lot of information. I'm glued to a computer. I grew up playing relatively safe sports, and my biggest hobby is somewhat video games. So you might be wondering, how did skydiving fall into my life? Well, unexpected events. So in 2019, I was diagnosed with a brain AVM, which I sum this up to basically a potential aneurysm. In March of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID lockdown, I had a non-invasive brain surgery that would take 2 years to heal. I plan to go into more detail about this in a future video, so if you're interested, be sure to subscribe to the channel to catch that video when it's ready. 2 years later, in May of 2022, my neurosurgeon looked at my brain scans with the brain AVM completely gone, and so he turned to me and he said, "Go live your life." So that's exactly what I did. July 2nd of 2022, I signed up for the skydiving accelerated freefall course at Skydive Elsinore. Fast forward to today, and I'm now at 77 jumps, and I'd like to tell you about them in hopes that maybe you'll want to do your first skydive, or maybe even join the accelerated freefall course. But the biggest purpose of making this video is that I wanted to share my story and what I've learned about myself through skydiving, and how a lot of what I've learned can apply to regular people who don't skydive. Things that really clicked and opened up a whole new world for me. So how it starts. You join the accelerated freefall course, you have to do a minimum of 25 jumps, and the first 8 jumps, or at least the first 8 parts of the course, are to pass these levels that are set up for you that will teach you the fundamentals of skydiving, and how to skydive safely, things to consider when you're in the air. I was lucky and I did pass those first 8 courses on my first try, but it didn't come easy. I remember that my first jump went pretty well, a lot of adrenaline. However, when it came to landing, I ended up lifting my hands a little too early, right on the final approach. And that was because I felt naturally to do that, as if I was gonna catch myself on the ground so I don't eat shit. However, by leaving my hands up, it released my brakes, continued to move faster forward, and I fell forward, and it was not pretty. So I took about 3 weeks off, kind of processing and kind of recovering from some injury that I had from that landing. But on my second jump, I had an instructor. It was Alan from Skydive Elsinore. And he told me that I should practice my flare up in the air to get a feel for how that is, and to not do what I did in the first jump. So I ended up doing that, practice it, and I was able to land safely, and I continued through the rest of the courses. The next levels were pretty similar. I had to do a couple different things. It's really about testing me under adrenaline to react even with small movements or small motions, to practice my stability, but also not to freak out or forget what I'm doing, to always pull your parachute. You'd be surprised what adrenaline can do you. Thankfully, I didn't have any issues with doing those. Levels 3 through 5 went pretty well. I learned additional techniques, things to do with the big adrenaline rush that you're feeling in your first skydives, and being able to perform what was necessary to move on to the next level. So I want to tell you a short story about my level 6, 7, and 8 jumps, because these were a pivotal moment, not just in skydiving, but in my life. So I feel like I should highlight a little bit more detail in here and tell you more about why they're so important to me. So by this point at level 6, I had developed a chipping motion where I would rock back and forth, forward and back. And I couldn't figure out why that was happening. I was getting some advice from the instructors, and I would take that advice and I would just psychoanalyze it times 1,000. And I was just starting to get really stressful to me, and thinking about doing the next jumps because I couldn't figure out why this was happening. And I'm so early on into my skydiving career, I look back at it and I'm like, why did that affect me so much? But I showed up for my level 6 jump, and I met an instructor that I'd seen around at Skydive Elsinore, and it was Sarah. So Sarah, she she hits me up and she's like, hey, you doing level 6 skydive? You're trying? And I was like, yes. And then I just word vomited all this stuff about my chipping motion and critiquing myself and explaining it all to her. And she just was like, okay, it's probably a lot of information. So we talked about body position, we practiced things on the ground, and then we went up in the air to do my level 6 jump. We start the jump and I start to have the chipping motion. And my mind's racing at this point. I'm thinking, why is this happening? Is my body position off? Am I gonna become really unstable? This is, starting to freak out a little bit here. And Sarah just moved right in front of me and she just looked at me and she smiled. I don't know what happened, but things just clicked in that moment. I took a deep breath and all of a sudden I stopped chipping and I continued with the requirements of the skydive. So we get to the ground, we debrief, and she just tells me, she's like, you had a good arch in your body, everything seemed fine, but you're too tense. You need to just take a deep breath, maybe take a deep breath every time I look at my altimeter. So I started doing that. Thankfully that day was not busy, and she asked me, Trent, do you have time to do the level 7 jump? And I was ecstatic at that point. I'd gained this huge confidence from the level 6 jump. So I said, yes, let's do it. Let's go up. We debriefed about what we need to do on the ground and we went up and I jumped out. So this jump was more advanced. It's definitely had many more movements than the previous levels. And so this included doing a cannonball exit to present instability and to be able to get stable. And then this was followed up with a backflip. And then I had to do a barrel roll and then tracking. I was a little nervous in an excited way, but the previous fear that I had was completely gone. You can see in this jump that I was definitely having fun with the way that I was cheesing during the barrel roll. The jump went fantastic. Sarah was very happy. She could tell that I was finally having fun and I was giggly and just really proud of myself. You could tell that I had a lot more confidence in my skydiving. So she asked, hey, do you have time to do the level 8 jump? And I said, hell yes, let's do it. Let's go back up. So we went and did the level 8 jump. This also was similar to the level 7 where there were a lot more things I had to do during the jump. And so this time I had to do a dive exit, followed up with a front flip, and then I had to do a barrel roll with a 360-degree turn. And then I'd have to dock onto Sarah. And then from there I had to turn and do a bit of tracking. So with this jump, we got back to the ground. I gave Sarah the biggest hug ever. She could tell I was just on top of the world at this point. Well, I was on top of the world and I clearly fell down. But I was incredibly happy. And the reason for this was that I had finally discovered something about myself where I overanalyze things a lot. I feel like I research a lot. This maybe has to do with just how I operate. But I tend to do a lot of research before I do anything, where it's almost limiting and creates a lot of fear for me to try new things and to go out there and explore and do things. In this case, I had developed what I think was too much research beforehand, and if I didn't have enough research, I felt like I couldn't achieve what I was trying to do. This was probably one of the best, if not the best day of my life. It felt like something was trying to teach me how to approach hard situations like this differently, giving me a completely different perspective. I felt like I had just unlocked a new secret about myself that I didn't know I could do. In combination with research and the way that I operate, I also needed to realize that I could figure out things as I go, that I'm not going to be able to figure it all out beforehand, but that, hard situations are gonna come up and you just gotta face them. So with this all in mind, I've learned to approach hard decisions a little bit differently, and that sometimes the unknown is gonna appear and I'm gonna have to face it. But, I keep telling myself, well, I figured out skydiving, so what can't I figure out? Just jump. There's some tips now that I wanna go over, things that I did learn through my skydiving that I'm hoping will be useful to other skydivers if you're watching this video and you're trying to find out more information. So the first part is to connect with others. Skydive culture is like really cool. People are really chill. And it's really good to have resources to connect with, people to jump with, but also you can learn from each other, learn how to become better skydivers, try new things, try fun things. It's also a huge benefit to make friends with other riggers who can teach you about the actual skydiving canopies, things that you might need to get fixed or looked at, adjustments, so definitely keep that in mind. Second thing is to learn from each skydive. I'm sure that you might have heard this already, but even people who are in thousands of jumps are going to experience something a little bit different that they wish they could fix or that they'd want to work on or improve on. An example of how I learned was, like I mentioned at the beginning of explaining my skydiving AFF course, was that I had tested out my two-stage flare, which is the braking technique for landing. It's important to test that out in the air, but also keep that in mind when you're renting new gear. Maybe that canopy might have a different point at which that flare needs to come down at a certain distance, and it's going to change every time you rent different gear. So keep that in mind. Also, it'll keep you a lot safer for your landings and prevent injuries like I had. Third thing is take a canopy control course sooner than later. I waited to take mine for my B license requirement, but this was actually something I wish I would have taken earlier after taking the course. There's a lot of good information in there that you're not going to pick up from on your AFF course. These canopy control courses will teach you how to have better landings, which is actually where a lot of injuries come into skydiving. So I recommend taking a course sooner than later. It saved me from a couple scenarios. A very important one, when I had a brake line snap, I learned how to practice landing with the rear risers from the canopy course, able to land that with rear risers. So I definitely recommend taking that course a lot sooner than later. Speaking about malfunctions, learn to pack your parachutes also sooner than later. Don't get used to having packers do that for you. Get good at doing this just yourself, especially if it's your own gear. And not only is it going to save you money, but you'll learn how your canopy operates when you pack it yourself in certain ways. If you make adjustments, how that might feel different with your openings. But it's also just to prevent you from having a hard opening, which I've had a couple, and they were all related to having other people pack my parachute. So trust yourself to do that. And the fifth thing, yes, trust yourself. One of the examples I have is that I had problems trusting my pack jobs because I did tons of research on how to pack them, how to pack my parachute. However, I was so scared to actually pack and then jump them. But once I overcame that fear, I realized that fear was something that was so minimal and that my openings have been fantastic. Just do your research and trust yourself. Give it a shot. If you're in doubt, have other people help you, but just don't get stuck with not actually moving forward with things. And for the last tip, this is completely optional, but I highly recommend doing some indoor skydiving, some tunnel time. This stuff is incredibly helpful. It replicates a regular skydive very closely, obviously without the deployment of a parachute. But I found that in my experience, I was having issues right after getting my A license, that I was backsliding, where I would just naturally move backwards. So if I was jumping with people, I was moving backwards from them, and I'd have to actually think about it before correcting it, and it would just take up time and all this stuff. But when I started doing indoor skydiving, I was able to correct that. And it's also really easy to stay in a tunnel. It's a lot cheaper if you calculate it compared to how much free fall time you have versus tunnel time. It's actually cheaper and more beneficial for you to experience indoor skydiving to correct things and then go out there and jump out of a plane and perform those things a lot better. Also, for friends that will never do a skydive, I highly recommend doing indoor skydiving. It feels pretty similar in the sense that you have a lot of air that replicates what it's like to be in free fall. And yeah, some quick tips too. Rent gear before buying. Don't get on that so early on. You should be trying out different gear to find out what works for you in different containers. I also recommend consulting a rigger before you buy gear. That's very important because you don't want to buy used gear without having it properly checked by someone who professionally knows canopies. This is just peace of mind. And then also, last tip, just join some of the events that happen at your drop zone. It's a great way to meet other skydivers, lifelong friends in this sport. So definitely join those events. So now that 1 year's gone by, what's next? Well, I'm hoping to continue to do a lot of fun jumps. I just recently did a fun jump by hot air balloon, and I was able to bring my dad up with me, and he was able to experience and see that. Not that he jumped, but he got to see me jump off, so that was really cool. I also just recently did a helicopter jump with some people that I met in my first AFF course. That was also really cool. It marked our 1 year anniversary of actually being licensed skydivers, and it was super cool for us to have that type of jump. All three of us who had started the same program at the same time. So I want to continue doing fun jumps like that, exploring those at different locations and being able to meet some cool people through that. I also want to get to my 200 jump mark. That's going to allow me to wear a camera on my skydives. That's a requirement before I can actually attach one to my helmet. But then I also want to get my C license so I can have that under my belt, have that experience, but then also jump at certain zones that have license requirements, and I should be able to meet them with that one. The main purpose of skydiving for me, beyond just this 1 year mark and getting these other goals in place, but I've always wanted to travel to new places and be able to see them from a different perspective. I know I share this with a lot of other skydivers, and it's something that's really motivated me to want to get better and to actually skydive more. So for me, my ultimate goal is to be able to go to Japan and to skydive out there. It's one of my favorite countries, and it was the one country that came to mind first where I wanted to jump out and skydive at. But I do want to get those other requirements like the C license before I go out there, because I definitely want to wear a camera and record that experience. I hope that my experience and stories has taught you something about skydiving. Whether you're looking to do your first skydive, maybe you're already in the AFF program looking for more things and research, or you just like hearing about experiences connected to skydiving. But if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's to ignore whatever might be stopping you from exploring your passions, whether you know what those are or you're still searching for them. It wasn't until my skydiving experience that I had discovered we are much more capable beings than we give ourselves credit for. I think a lot of societal pressures and expectations set on us has restricted our creativity to explore things. But the unknown is meant to be explored by taking a chance. Trust yourself that regardless if exploring the unknown is going to result in a success or a failure, that you're going to figure it out. If you enjoyed this video and have been inspired by my journey into skydiving, leave a comment and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future videos. I have more stories, tips, and thrilling moments to share, including a deep dive into my medical journey that brought me here. Liking this video and sharing it will help me reach others that might be interested in skydiving or want to learn something from my experience. So until next time, remember to chase your passions, explore the unknown, and take a leap, because the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you soon.